or from down, wandered up from downstairs, I suppose. It's coffee and discussions that happen there. All right, can you click up? There we go. All right, so we're about kind of a week behind where we were where we are in our Sunday morning series, or worship. And so today we're on Hebrews 11, kind of in the Hall of Faith chapter. And so we'll kind of touch on who these people were and why they're important and what we know about them, why they'd be inspired to us. All right, and again, this is all about building up into the idea of what faith is. That faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And so again, especially the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Again, we look at all these people, they've got promises from God, and they remain faithful even as they haven't seen them yet, as they're waiting for them. And some of the promises they get aren't revealed until Jesus, and some still aren't revealed fully to us yet. All right, could someone read these first few verses for us?
Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible.
All right. So again, starting by faith and seeing, the promises and what we have. What we see the promises first starts off with creation. Very, very good place to start. And they'll go back to the very beginning and that recognition that God made everything by speaking. And so by faith, they accept that happen, we accept that happen. And that's the basis for all these other promises that'll come. And also kind of recognizing that God's not making things out of other stuff, but making things out of things that are not. We kind of see that theme throughout the Bible too, that God starts with nothing and makes something out of it. We'll see that with some of these people that are mentioned too. All right, any other thoughts before we move on to the next verse? All right. All right, next, read the next verse for us.
By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks.
All right, so again, the story of Cain and Abel, and Abel's held up as an example of faith. Why would he be held up as an example of faith?
God declared him righteous.
God, again, yeah, I mean, that's going to be the theme that the author of the Hebrews is dealing with, that Paul deals with as he's working with Jewish Christians, that idea that why are you righteous? Well, I'm righteous because I kept the law. Well, no, if we look back, we see that they were righteous not because they kept the law, but because they had faith in God. And it's the faith that makes them righteous, not the keeping of the law part. All right, so again, remember, what's the story of Cain and Abel? What happens there? One kills the other. And why does that happen?
Because Cain's sacrifice originally, what happened, something happened that maybe wasn't supposed to, but
Right.
then Abel's sacrifice was accepted.
Yeah.
And this created a contradiction in Cain's mind, and that led to something bad.
Right. So again, Cain and Abel are the sons of Adam and Eve. They're offering sacrifices. Cain's keeping the garden. Abel's more herdsman. And they're both offering sacrifices, and God accepts Abel's and not Cain's, and Cain gets jealous then and kills Abel because of that. It's somewhat unclear exactly why the sacrifice isn't acceptable, whether it's Cain's attitude in giving it, whether it's the fact that he's not giving the first fruits or the best, he's just kind of giving the leftovers. Some of those sorts of things. But again, Abel offers the right sacrifice, and then, first innocent blood, so to speak, shed. And so that kind of points to Christ too. And then also recognition too, remember God has mercy on Cain and instead gives him the mark of Cain that's supposed to protect him as he goes through the rest of his life. All right. All righty. Next hero of the faith.
By faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him.
All right. So again, how do we please God? Through our faith, not through anything else. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. Again, if you draw near to God, you must believe he exists. That seems kind of a low bar to clear. But yeah, you're not going to try and approach God in prayer if you don't believe God exists. And then also that he rewards those who seek him, those who are going after him in faith. All right. Oop. All right. So what do you remember about Enoch? I'm assuming a whole lot, because he's a super important person mentioned all the time. Right. So really all we know about Enoch from the Bible is in the genealogies in Genesis between Adam and Noah. Enoch is mentioned, and it says that Enoch walked with God and was no more. And so that's usually interpreted as meaning that, because everyone else, it just talks about gathered to his fathers, died, buried. Enoch, they don't describe that, so there's some idea that Enoch's taken up into heaven directly and doesn't actually die. And so then you get several books attributed to Enoch later, because there are people trying to make up things. Well, let's pick an obscure character no one can double check on. Hey, Enoch, that sounds good. But first Enoch, so there's like 3 Enoch books. First Enoch is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in part, and is also quoted in the book of Jude, which is also a fairly obscure book. So Jude, toward the end of the New Testament, one of the one-page letters, because Jude's so similar to 2 Peter, there's debate about how original it is.
So how about that last sentence? It only survived in Geas.
Right.
So therefore it was written.
Right. So it was potentially original first Enoch. So it's in the list of things that are written about people in the Bible. It seems to be at least first Enoch seems to fit with what's written in the Bible more so than second or third, and then some of the other weird ones. And then, but it's non-canonical, which means it's not included in the official list, and so at best it's you read it for devotional purposes or something. It's not something that defines doctrine. And part of that is Ge'ez. So that's the only language that it survived in. So we have bits and pieces of first Enoch in Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Greek in the quote from Jude and some other places. But the only full extent copy of first Enoch was found in Ge'ez. Anyone know where that language is from? Close. A little further south. Also starts with an E.
Oh, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, right. So again, as much as we talk about Kabeta and missionaries in Ethiopia, there's connection. There's the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which has some different things to it, but is ancient. And you have connections to Judaism that are even more ancient. If you remember the Queen of Sheba going to see Solomon, and things like that. And so some of these things then made it to Ethiopia, and first Enoch, written in Hebrew, probably 2nd century before Christ. So again, later than the rest of the Old Testament. Another reason it didn't make it in, but it's got to Ethiopia, got translated there, and a copy there is the only one that survived 2,000 years to the point that we have it. And so it's again. Part of why do I mention this again? The first Enoch gets again mentioned in the book of Jude, so it's at least important enough that it gets quoted and used as in Scripture, and also that the way the author of Hebrews is using some of these things, like let's take Melchizedek, and let's take Enoch, and let's take these obscure Old Testament figures and use them to show faith, is not unusual. That was going on around this time too. All right? Yeah.
Is First Enoch in the Catholic Bible by any chance?
No, it's
So it just is.
right. No, because the
Literary.
yeah. So again, the what we call the Apocrypha, the books that are in the Catholic Bible that aren't in Protestant Bibles, those are because they were written they're in the Greek version of the Old Testament, but not the Hebrew version, is part of that. And there's some, we read them, they're good. Heck, when we went through the Sunday Schools stories series this summer, we sang an excerpt from the Apocrypha, and we sang the Song of the Three Young Men, because some of it's, extra bits of Daniel, there's an extra psalm, some other stuff. There's the historical stuff about the Maccabees and their revolt, which again happens in the intertestamental period. Maccabean revolts, 180 something BC. So helps us fill in the history and stuff, but again, they're not on the same level as Scripture, as the older New Testaments. But they're, so be kind of like if you were reading a devotional book that, quotes from Scripture but has other stories in it. Kind of that sort of level, if that makes sense. But they, again, because they're historical, some of them that helps us understand what's going on in the religion at the time, helps us kind of connect to see how they were thinking, how they were writing, and that kind of thing. And again, this idea that you take a book, or if you're writing something, it's not necessarily going to get much circulation if you just put your name on it, but if you put, obscure biblical figure's name on it, then people might read it. But again, first Enoch's fairly lines up with things, but then you get things both in taking figures from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And people will use that, but then write something that goes off in left field, goes very against what the faith is really teaching, what that person probably would have taught, and then that's where you run into issues. So, all right. Sorry for the random tangent, but there we go. All right. So heroes of the faith so far, we've got creation, we've got Abel, and we've got Enoch. So now we get to Noah. Could someone read this for us?
By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith.
All right. So again, of course, Noah builds an ark. And this is a simple project that he's able to complete in a few days, right? God says, build an ark, and Noah says, oh yeah, I'm a skilled shipbuilder, I'm right by the coast, this will be fine, right? No. So why is Noah commended for his faith? Here?
He trusted God.
What was that?
He believed God.
Believed in God, right. Yeah, not a drop of rain in sight, nowhere near the coast. He has to work on the ark. I forgot to look up the exact years, but it's decades. This isn't just a quick, simple project. And all the while, you got all these people going around laughing at him. What are you crazy guy doing? Why are you building a boat? There's no, here in the middle of nowhere. This isn't going to work. You don't need it. Plus, you've got the whole world being, wicked and sinful, not going to listen to God. And so, but Noah, again, whole world's against you. Well, Noah trusted in God. You should do the same. All right. Any other thoughts there on Noah? All righty. All right, now we get into Abraham, and we get a few stories about him as we go through Hebrews 11 here. All right, could someone read this for us?
By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore.
All right. So again, why are we holding up Abraham as an example of faith? What does he do to show his faithfulness?
Picks up and goes.
Picks up and goes. God says go, and he goes to this place that he's never seen, never been to, maybe even never heard of. God says, okay, go west. Go west, young man, or not so young man at that point for Abraham. But so goes, and again, this is a centuries in the making process of how Abraham's descendants live in that land. Because Abraham goes, they have tents. He's not really doesn't really establish himself permanently there. Neither do Isaac or Jacob. We'll get into them later. And so again, that faithfulness of trusting in God, despite that, and continue to trust in God even as time goes on. And where's this promise, God? So again, and then we get Sarah mentioned too, the promise that she has faith that she will have a son, even though both she and Abraham are long past childbearing age. So of course, again, it's funny when you look at how she's described here versus reality in the Old Testament, because you get two times you'd think that Abraham is not, or that Sarah is not having faith. First off, they wait long enough. Sarah says, well, okay, I guess this isn't going to work. Let's use Hagar, the servant woman, so you at least get some son that way. And of course, that leads to Ishmael and a whole mess of problems. And then what's the reaction of Sarah when God says, okay, you're going to have a son by the time I come next year? She laughs, right? I mean, that's why how Isaac is named, name comes from, he laughs. Comes from laughter. That doesn't always really sound like someone who has a lot of faith, but she did. She had faith even as she had those moments of doubt. All right, and again, kind of the big point the author of Hebrews is going at is again because people, the Hebrews, the Jewish Christians, could point back to, well, I'm we're children of Abraham. That's why God sees us as righteous. We've kept the commands. Well, no. Why is Abraham credited as called righteous? He believed the Lord. He had faith. He trusted God. That's it. All the other things that Abraham does don't quite measure up to that. So, all right. Any other thoughts on the first part of Abraham here? Okay, we'll get it when Abraham gets mentioned a little more after this interlude we get. All right, could someone read this for us then?
These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, and for he has prepared for them a city.
All right. So again, they've gone out. So far, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham God's promised them things. They've seen some of it, but some not. Again, Abraham's promised he's going to have this land. His descendants are going to have this land. He's going to have a ton of descendants, and we're not to any of that yet. But again, recognizing that we're dealing with people who could go back, that kind of get this. So they were. They haven't seen what they're promised. They've seen it from afar. They haven't experienced it. They haven't seen it themselves. So they're strangers and exiles. They're seeking a homeland. They could have gone back to where they started from. Abraham could have said, "Okay, never mind. I'm going back to Ur the Chaldeans. Hopefully Dad forgives me for breaking all his idols, and I'll just take over the family business and go from there." But he doesn't. And so again, too, looking at this, for these Hebrews, for these Jewish Christians, they have the temptation to go back to what they've been doing, go back to the society they lived in, recognizing that they're strangers and exiles, though on earth, that they're pilgrims looking for the heavenly country, not in the one they're in. And of course, the Jewish Christians have some sense of that already. Living as Jews in the Roman Empire, even if they're in Israel, it's not their land. They're not controlling their land. So there's in some way strangers and exiles there, and if they're not there, recognizing they're not a part of the normative culture, but they are. And so, of course, we remember that too, that we're still strangers and exiles here on earth, and will be until Christ comes again. But again, we're looking forward to the heavenly country, not any earthly one. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on that interlude? All right. So Abraham part 2. Someone read this for us.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, for which, figuratively speaking, he did not receive him back.
All right. So again, Abraham's faithfulness was shown first in going to the promised land and trusting him, but then his faith is confirmed, in a sense, by the almost sacrifice of Isaac. And again, how does the author of Hebrews try and understand Abraham doing this? Recognizing that even if Isaac dies, that God could raise him from the dead. That if Isaac is going to be the promised promised one, that God will make sure that he is able to fulfill his role in the promise, even in this case. And of course, God provides the lamb for the sacrifice, taking Isaac's place, kind of foreshadowing how Jesus takes our place. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments there? All right. All right, then. So now we're done with Abraham, and now we get a few other quick hits as we go. All right, so by faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Though, of course, that gets a little turned about. Because what happens with the blessings of Jacob and Esau by Isaac?
Jealousy.
Jealousy, right. Why is there jealousy?
They both wanted the blessing of...
Both wanted a blessing, and Jacob, the deceiver, the heel grabber, tricks Esau out of his blessing not once but twice. First, give me your birthright for a cup of soup, and then Esau's off hunting, and Jacob comes with food and a hairy robe and things and gets the blessing that way. Which again kind of shows, God doesn't work in the normal way of, normally Esau's the oldest, he'd be the one who gets the blessing, but instead it's Jacob. And then even though it's Jacob the deceit, all the weird family dynamics and the tricking going on, God still works through and in Jacob. So, all right. And then by faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. So it's actually kind of fun, interesting to read Jacob's blessings of his sons at the end of his life in Genesis 49. I didn't put them all in, but the one that gets mentioned the most is Judah, which, if you remember, Judah's like the fourth son. So again, not the first. But yet, when he's giving these prophecies, speaking over his sons, what is Judah? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So we get the kings, we get David from the tribe of Judah, and then, of course, ultimately Jesus from the tribe of Judah. All right, any thoughts on that? All right. All right, and then Joseph, by faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. So why is this an act of faith by Joseph?
He wants to be buried back in the promised land.
Buried back in the promised land, right. So again, Jacob has 12 sons. Joseph's the spoiled one, kind of is dumb enough to tell his brothers he had dreams about them bowing down to him. They don't like him. In general, that kind of is the tipping point. So they first think about killing him, but then Judah's able to convince him, well, let's sell him to these traveling slavers. He gets to Egypt, goes through ups and downs there too. High place in Potiphar's house, and then in prison, and then back up to being Pharaoh's number 2. And then despite everything else, despite being Pharaoh's number 2, despite Jacob and the brothers and everyone coming to Egypt during the famine, Joseph still says at the end of his life, gives these directions: make sure you take my bones back to the promised land, back to the land God has given us. And so, so that, again, that takes an act of faith, recognizing, it'd be pretty comfortable in Egypt. They, they got their own area of land. Joseph's been Pharaoh's number 2. They're going to should be set there. Why would they want to go back to this place where they've struggled and, don't have a permanent house? They can build their houses in Egypt. But no, Joseph's saying, I trust God promised that's our land. We're going to get back there. And so make sure you take my bones with me. Or take my bones with you when you go. All right. All right, then jump 400 years, and because I want to read about Moses.
By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict.
All right, again, what was the king's edict? Yeah, Israelites are getting too numerous, so we've got to kill all the boys, but the midwives don't. And including then Moses' parents hide him in a basket. His sister follows along the Nile. He gets found by Pharaoh's daughter. Moses' sister says, "Hey, wait, I got a great idea for a Hebrew slave who could be a wet nurse for you," and gets him to be raised by his mother for a bit, and then is raised in Pharaoh's household. But that's not the end of it, because then by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. And then by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. All right, so again, Moses finds out that he's an Israelite, he's not really an Egyptian, and finds out how the Israelites are mistreated, kills an Egyptian overseer, and then flees to the wilderness in Midian and hangs out there for a while. But again, these people who have faith, this isn't just a one-time thing, it's kind of an ongoing thing, because then Moses' life is sort of divided into 40s, that there's 40 years from his birth to when he runs away from Pharaoh, another 40 years he's in Midian, and then until then he sees the burning bush and heads back to Egypt, and then after another 40 years wandering in the wilderness and stuff until he gets to see the promised land from afar. All right? And then by faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so the destroyer, the firstborn, might not touch them. And so again, Moses gets the command. This is last plague's coming. Here's what you're going to do. You got to do. He makes sure everyone does it. So even if the people are kind of like, well, you want us to do what with the blood? Moses does. All right. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. So again, the great miracle of the wilderness of, because you see this in movies or things, but at the same time, take a bit of faith to walk through there, right? Okay, well, just ignore the walls of water that are look like they could crash down on you at any minute, and instead, trust that God's in control and going to keep you safe, and then stop the Egyptian army from doing that too. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they'd been encircled for 7 days. So we see that, and then we get to, because again, impenetrable fortress. God, we can't do this on our own. God says, okay, do this. Wait, what? You want us to walk around the city? Okay, and then blow horns on the seventh day, and the walls come tumbling down. All right, and then by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she'd given a friendly welcome to the spies. Again, Rahab had faith that this people, the Israelites she'd heard about, and their God, who'd done all this stuff in Egypt, Everyone else was just afraid and hiding. She goes, well, I'm afraid, but that means he's the real God, so I'm going to help out these Israelite spies when given the opportunity. All right, and for what more shall I say then? We're about out of time, just like the author of the Hebrews was. Time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Of course, we talked about Gideon and the defeat of the Philistine army. Barak is one of the judges, although he's really not the most important person in this story. That's where Deborah, the prophetess, is sort of in charge. And then Sisera gets killed by Jael with a nail in the head after he drinks some warm milk and falls asleep after the battle. Samson, strong man, and then kills a bunch of Philistines at the end of his life too. Jephthah is kind of an interesting one mentioned. Has a great victory, but because he made this rash vow of, okay, I'm going to sacrifice to God the first thing I see when I come back home victorious, and his daughter's the first thing that he sees. Runs into some issue there. And then, of course, David, then Goliath. And then, again, those who, through faith, conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Of course, we know Daniel there. Quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. So those are the good things of those endured by faith. Now we get to the not so good. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking, flogging, chains, imprisonment, stoned, sawn in two, killed with the sword, went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. All right, so again, the great heroes of the faith who are looking ahead to Christ. We've seen Christ, we know who Christ is, and so we've got a better thing than they did, but those examples encourage us as we go through our lives too. All right, and we'll stop here and we'll keep going next week, I guess. So thank you very much for coming.